Okay, so in the acknowledgments page of the new book, Vital Signs, the last but not least entry is an acknowledgement of my mother for being a consummate role model in living a passionate life, and for always giving me lots of material to write about. But there's a postscript to that acknowledgement that I want to share with you because it has everything to do with my personal interest, not just my professional interest, in the subject of passion. And that is that in the last 15 or 20 or more years of my mother's life, starting roughly in her early 60s, her get up and go, as they say, got up and went. All right? This is her spark, her mojo, her life force, her vitality. Goes by a lot of names. But she just slowly opted out of active engagement in life, which I think really is a lot of what passion is ultimately about. And what crystallized this for me was a conversation that she and I had just a couple of years ago. She had been at loose ends about how to spend her time since retiring from being a stockbroker. And one afternoon, she very uncharacteristically asked me what I thought she should do with her time. All right? So I jumped on this rare opportunity and I made some suggestions. I said, how about taking some art classes? She said, oh, I did that already. As if art is something you do once and check off a list. I said, how about taking one of those music appreciation courses at the college that'll take you on field trips to the symphony and the opera, because she wasn't driving anymore. And she said, oh, those are for old people, which just made me bite my tongue. I said, how about a trip? I know you can't do the adventure travel anymore that you like to do, but what about a cruise up the Inside Passage? What about a barge trip in Provence? At the very least, you'll get out of Dodge. And she said, nah. I mean, this marvelously articulate person, nah. I said, okay, how about volunteering with SCORE, Service Corps of Retired Executives, National Mentoring Program. I said, you have so much incredible experience that you could be passing along to people coming up through the ranks. To which she said, oh, please, volunteering? She said, that counts for absolutely nothing on a resume. To which I said, Mother, you're 82 years old. Are you still building your resume? I mean, are you still climbing the corporate ladder? Not that you should ever give up the good fight, but come on. You know, and I think what happened in that moment for me was that I realized that I had to give up my own good fight. This is the one where, as I had for 20 years, continued to encourage her and cajole her and inspire her and nag her to take on some new challenges, make some new friends, get out of the house, submit herself to some of the deeper calls that come in this later phase of life. Just to re-engage with the world, come back to life after what I personally perceive to be the dual demotivators of retirement and a second divorce. All right? Or as she put it, no one to do it for anymore, which is a very interesting comment. And I don't know, maybe a lot of people have this experience, perhaps especially at retirement, that they discover that they have a kind of a radioactive core of depression inside of them that was just being held in check all those years by if you will, the cooling towers of busy lives all right? And when those busy lives stop, or even just slow down, the depression comes to the fore. I don't know how many people have this experience, but I think it's formidable. It's just that she lost the will to participate, to explore and create and contribute. She stopped investing herself in life, stopped investing in herself. Got to remember, I'm wearing a wireless lav. She stopped investing in herself. And it turns out that you can't make somebody do that. Even if you are Mr. Callings and your own mother is throwing your game all off. It's not something you can do. But I wondered, how does this happen? How does this happen that people lose their appetite for being in the game? Right? And people with a tremendous amount of life force. I mean, I have to share a little bit of context with you about my mom because it explains a little bit more about what happened to her. She was a force of nature. She was a dynamo. She was one of the first women on Wall Street in the early 1960s. Me and my two brothers have this photograph that each one of us has put up in our office. Is a picture of her with her graduating class at the F.I. DuPont School for Account Execs in New York. All right? There's a picture of her in a sea of men in black and her in the front with a white knee-length dress, just looking like a queen bee. And it says so much about her and frankly, about the childhood that we had. But so she was an expert skier, sculptor, piano player, published poet, reader of the New York Times from cover to cover, and mother of 3 boys. 4 if you include my father. That one sort of slipped out. But so I wonder, how does this level of passion and engagement turn into dispassion, into resignation and boredom and time being torn off the calendar unused? And of course, how do you stop the slide? So I know a few things that I didn't know then. I know that passion comes and goes. There's no such thing as a life of passion, any more than there's a perpetual motion object. I mean, it's got its seasons and it comes and goes. It's a sine wave, all right? I know that life is perfectly capable of knocking the stuffing out of people, even very strong people, with all of its demands and its disappointments and its just sometimes mind-numbing routines. And if you're one of those people that's just trying to keep your chin above water, you're just trying to get by day to day, maybe it's asking a lot to also kick up your heels. How many of you have ever seen a movie called Dead Poets Society? Does that ring a bell? Okay, most of you. You'll recognize this. I actually heard somebody say this once. She said, "I have a Carpe Diem mug. And truthfully, Greg, at 6 a.m., it does not make me want to seize the day." She said, "It makes me want to slap a dead poet." And I know that there's a clue in there when my mother says, "There's nobody to do it for anymore." This is a significant comment, I think, because psychologists talk about what they call primary and secondary motivation. All right? Primary motivation is doing something for its own sake, for the charge, the thrill, the challenge of doing it. Secondary motivation is doing something for a payoff, whether it's attention or money or power, sex, fame, whatever. And there's a pretty simple test, I think, to determine which one of them is in the driver's seat. And that's that when the payoffs dry up, do you still do the work? You know what I'm saying? Are your passions still intact? All right? I also know that one of the primary dramas, dynamics in people's relationship to their own vitality and myself eminently included, is the tug-of-war between passion and security. Okay? My general observation is that in the contest between the two of them, security tends to win. Tends to win. Passion tends to get backburnered. All right? But I think that if you're not expressing it, then you're suppressing it, or repressing it, or depressing it. And they all mean the same thing, pushing it down. Pushing it down, which I don't believe you can do with impunity. All right? And by the way, the clinging to security and comfort is not just a personal challenge. It's multi-generational for one thing, and it's collective for another. I mean, we live in a culture that likes its gates and its guardrails, likes its bailouts and its subsidies, where schools are eradicating playgrounds for insurance purposes. And manufacturers feel compelled to put warning labels on their products that say things like, caution, hot coffee is hot. Remember the McDonald's case? Or do not iron clothes on body. This Superman costume does not enable you to fly. These are real. Here's my favorite. Remove children from stroller before folding up for storage. I mean, do we really need to be told that? Wow. And there's only one reason why a company would put do not iron clothes on body on their, because somebody tried it. What? I'm in a rush. I got to get out of the house fast. But I think that continually opting for security and comfort over passion and expressiveness and authenticity will not, in my opinion, ever adequately compensate you for giving up your passions and selling your soul. They will probably allow you to suffer in nicer surroundings. Okay? But the fact is, we don't just crave security and safety. All right? We also crave their opposite. We crave their opposite. We crave excitement and novelty, spontaneity, the act of discovery, an adrenaline rush from time to time. For some people, a locker at the bus station. In other words, we like life to occasionally be unpredictable and full of surprises, and we like to feel alive. And we know that being alive without feeling alive is like eating food with no taste to it. I made an interesting Freudian slip not too long ago that highlighted for me some of the challenges of balancing passion and security. It was just a little moment, but I had gone on the road to do some adventure travel, in fact. And at a time when I had a lot of irons in the fire, a lot of business projects that I was juggling, and I was apparently more stressed out about this than I was aware, because what I meant to say on the outgoing message of my answering machine was, hello, this is Gregg Levoy. I'll be out of the office until August 25th. But what I said instead, and didn't find out until I got home, was, hello, this is Gregg Levoy. I'll be out of control until August 25th. Probably explained some of the messages that were waiting for me when I got home. And nor is this drama, by any stretch of the imagination, just a challenge for older people. Not at all. Even though I'm sure that aging has something to do with it. Just, again, the law of entropy being what it is, okay? In other words, the energy that it takes to fuel your passions may simply not be in the batteries to the same degree they were when you were younger. And you can't just slap in a new pair of batteries, right? But even if there is a certain a slowing down that does naturally occur as we get older, kind of a tempering of the drive, the fight in us. I think that losing interest in life is purely optional and detrimental. And I say that because I think because to some degree, passion, I think, is a survival mechanism in the sense that our attachment to life depends on our interest in it. You know, our sense of curiosity and wonder and enthusiasm and reverence and, of course, participation. So, my brother Ross recently sent me an article about the mother of a mutual friend of ours whose resume, in fact, reads almost exactly like our mom's. They were both among the first women on Wall Street. And in explaining to the interviewer her strategy for staying engaged and participating in life, she said simply, you get up in the morning, you get out, and you stay active. Now, I know this is almost the stuff of cliche, but I think it explains a lot about why she is still in the game. Going to work part-time in her mid-90s, and sharp as a tack. You know? So clearly there is a correspondence between passion and productivity and success, if not longevity. All right? I read a book recently called Corner Office. It was written by a New York Times columnist named Adam Bryant. And Adam interviewed 700 CEOs around the country. And he asked them, what qualities do you see most often in people who succeed? And number one on their collective lists was passionate curiosity. Passionate curiosity. This is undoubtedly what my father was trying to instill in me and my brothers with his favorite game to play with the three of us while we were growing up, something he invented called the alien game. Okay? So this is how the alien game worked. He was an alien from another planet, which we had suspected all along, frankly. And we were his guides on Earth, and we would go into the city, down by the shore, around the neighborhood, and he would ask questions about the planet that he saw, and we had to try to explain it to him. A marvelous teaching tool. So he would say things like, so what are the white formations that move through your atmosphere? And we'd say, he'd say, what are they composed of? And we'd say, and then he'd say, how do they get up there and what holds them up? You know, whole afternoons went by while we earthlings tried to figure this stuff out. And mostly how it's possible that you can know so much and understand so little. You know what I'm saying? You can live with something every day of your life and never come to understand its most basic properties. Like, why do your fingers wrinkle in the bathtub? It's like, why don't we know that by now? How do spiders avoid getting caught up in their own webs? And what holds clouds up if we know that water is heavier than air? Right? So, after my sobering conversation, very sobering conversation, frankly, with my mother, I remember being all set to congratulate myself for having fallen far from the tree when I suddenly remembered a conversation, a singular conversation I had with my brother Ross in our early 30s. So we were comparing notes on the various pleasures and passions we had let slide in the years since college, wondering where they went or where we went. All right? And between us at the time, they included piano playing, guitar playing, dancing, camping, getting massages, kayaking, going skiing in the mountains, which were only 2 hours away, swimming in the ocean that was only 2 blocks away, and lovemaking with our respective partners who were only arm's length away. You know? And so what we were looking at was habits of avoidance. Just how we had, for years, cultivated footpaths around the piano on our way to the kitchen, near the garden on our way to work and back, under the kayaks, which were hanging in the garage, collecting spider webs, and how when we occasionally came to and reached for the guitar, or the girlfriend, as the case may be, after so much time away, they had grown a little bit cold to the touch. All right? So, you guys remember the Far Side comics? Remember the Far Side? This may be a rough segue, but bear with me. I remember I used to have one on the wall in my office. It showed a picture of Medusa, all right? Medusa, whose hair is a nest of snakes. She's holding a mouse just beyond their reach. And the caption says, Medusa teasing her hair. I wish Gary would come out of retirement, I really do. But my point is that it is actually tragically easy to lose touch with our energies and our enthusiasms, all right? To say nothing of our sense of purpose and direction. And in any arena, whether it's vocational, relational, creative and expressive, spiritual, in any arena, to lose our sense of wonder, our sense of wildness, our connection to the wild, where we frankly have spent 99% of our developmental time, all right? Our sense of adventure, all right? Adventure is beautiful. It comes from a word meaning something about to happen. So a sense of adventure, which I think is elemental in a passionate life. The sense of adventure is related to a sense of anticipation, which I think is helped along immeasurably if you always give yourself something to look forward to. Part of living passionately, I think. Our sense of novelty, our sense of discovery and self-expression, right? Just to let them slide into disuse or get siphoned from us by all manner of just downward pulling forces, day-to-day living on Main Street life, stress, boredom, routine, responsibility, to say nothing of things like a Great Recession and Code Orange world. Just very easy to let them, and it's no wonder people want to batten their hatches under these kind of circumstances. But the fact is, I sometimes actually think that life itself is so full of deterrents to passion and expression and authenticity that what we casually refer to as normal behavior is actually a state of arrested development. It's just so pervasive, we often don't notice it. I was in the cemetery around the corner from my house. I live in Asheville, North Carolina. And there's a cemetery there where Thomas Wolfe is buried. And I recently stumbled on a gravestone I had not seen before for a W.C. Stradley. And his epitaph said, he lived a spotless life, a triumphant death. And I stood in front of it for the longest time thinking, I would much rather see that the other way around. A triumphant life, a spotless death. You know what I'm saying? I don't know, a spotless life? It does not strike me as something to aspire to. If you don't leave this life with a few grass stains on your pants, it seems to me you've missed the boat. If not the point, which is not to rise above it all, and wear your Sunday best all week. It's to sink your teeth into it while you have the chance. This is your precious nick of time. Let it drip down your chin. Here's one that'll scandalize some of you. I've got a friend who's got a poster on the wall in her office that shows a picture of, on the wall in her kitchen, that shows a picture of a woman down on her hands and knees cleaning out a bathtub. And a caption that says, "A clean house is the sign of a wasted life." It's kind of scary in some ways, isn't it? In which case, I should be doing great. But, the human mind is an absolute zoo of tactics. It's an absolute hen house, of tactics for keeping a lid on everything, playing it safe, right? I met a young fella at the CIIS, California Institute for Integral Studies in San Francisco. And he came up to me after the presentation and said that his whole life he has wanted to be a teacher and a public speaker. But that he has spent so many years, as he put it, biting my tongue, that he literally had a really pronounced scar on the tip of his tongue, like a big callus from where he had apparently bitten it repeatedly. Just so many ways of settling for less and reining ourselves in and biting our proverbial tongues. People, and I've been guilty of this as much as the next guy, we tell ourselves that daring is for daredevils, gambling is for gamblers, adventure is for adventurers, thrill is for thrill seekers. And these are all apparently descriptions of people who are not us. But I think if we attempt to drain life of all of its thrill and risk and surprise and passion and play it safe, we're gambling with our lives anyway. We're taking the chance that we're not going to live to regret it. Just because you're safe doesn't mean you won't be sorry. Clint Eastwood used to say, if you want a guarantee, buy a toaster. So, I want to share just a little bit about how this happens in a more developmental sense. And I'm going to pull this from a book I read by a poet named Robert Bly. Anybody familiar with Robert Bly? All right, wonderful. He wrote a book, among others, called A Little Book on the Human Shadow. Little tiny book. You can read it in one afternoon. All right? And in it, he has the simplest, most elegant description I've ever run across for how people get drained of their vitality. Again, in a developmental, long-term sense. And why it's so tough to get it back, right? Get our spark back. And this is what he says. I'll give you the Cliff Notes version. He says that when we're 1 or 2 years old, every one of us has a 360-degree personality, all right? 360-degree energy, exuberance, enthusiasm radiating out in every direction until our parents start sending us to our rooms for radiating certain parts of it, okay? I consulted with a woman a couple of years ago who said that when she was growing up, her parents sent her to her room for any displays of negative emotions. Tears, frustration, anger, anything like that. They punished her for this. They banished her, I should say. And this is actually, in a sense, a tactic that some religions to this day still use. It's called disfellowshipping, okay? Where you just lock somebody out, all right? So here she is. She's 40 years old. She's come for a consultation, and after a lifetime of repressing half of her emotional repertoire, she is now naturally feeling blocked from being her full, passionate self, the one that she's going to need, I think, in order to become the healer that she intuits herself to be, and builds a vocation around that and a life around that. And I think she quite rightly described her mission in life as soul retrieval, which I found a fascinating idea. Taking it back, soul retrieval. All right? So Bly says that every one of us carries behind us an invisible bag, and whatever parts of us our parents did not like get sliced off the pie and put in the bag. Okay? Then we get into school, he says. All right? And in service of fitting in and bringing home report cards that say, gets along well with others, we slice even more of ourselves off the bag, off the pie, and stuff it in the bag. All right? Whole slabs of just exuberance and natural energy. Carl Sagan. Remember Carl Sagan? He once described the difference between going into a kindergarten class and a high school class to talk about science. All right? You can probably imagine where this story is going to go. The kindergartners were open for business. You know? Just endlessly enthusiastic, avidly curious, natural-born scientists, I remember him saying, and never heard of a dumb question. In fact, I read in Newsweek magazine that children ask their parents typically 100 questions a day. It's amazing we don't want to bury them in the backyard, isn't it? So, the high schoolers, by and large, jaded. Like the sense of wonder, I remember mentioning this, the sense of wonder, which I think is an active ingredient in a passionate life, relegated to kid stuff. Just, you know, and terrified of asking dumb questions, of course. All right? So the next whistle stop is the working world. Okay? And in continuing to win friends and influence people, stuff even more of ourselves in the bag. These are the parts of us that organizational life, of course, would prefer that you leave in the parking lot when you punch out. When you punch in, I mean. You know, I mean your emotional life, your personal life, your spiritual life. You know, when I was going into the corporate world to do callings workshops based on the first book, I was told on 3 occasions by 3 separate people, do not use that word here. Brined in religious overtones. Don't even use it. You're just going to close people off. So there's something about something as incredibly powerful and elemental as a calling. You can't even use that kind of language in a corporate setting. Now, I know things have changed a bit in the last 20 years, but still. All right, so what Bly says is that out of the nice round globe of life force that every single one of us started this game out with, the average 20-year-old, he says, ends up with a slice. So we spend the first 20 years of our lives trying to decide what goes in the bag, and the rest of our lives trying to get them out again. And this is not always so easy. And in fact, I was reminded how not easy it is recently because I went out to visit my twin brother. This person I've been referring to, my brother Ross, he's my twin, all right? I'm out visiting and we're hiking on a forest trail in the Santa Cruz Mountains, California, where he lives. And we're having a debate about how susceptible we are or are not to cultural conditioning. I think it started when he made some bold declaration about being immune to advertising. So in order to make a point about how susceptible, in fact, we are to cultural conditioning, I dared him to hold hands with me till we reached a bend in the forest path, I don't know, 100 feet up, okay? I remember he reaches out his hand, accompanied by a look that roughly translated to, I call your bluff. So here's the thing. There was clearly nobody around. We're out in the forest. There's nobody around. But the next 10 seconds provoked an outbreak of reflexes that would have put Pavlov's dogs to shame. You know, embarrassment, awkwardness, self-consciousness, paranoia, a little bit of revulsion. Pure conditioning, you know? All we were doing was holding hands. We're twin brothers, for God's sakes. We look exactly alike, you know? You know, we were barely pushing a toe across the line, especially in a place like Santa Cruz, California. You know? And all the alarm bells went off, you know? And I wouldn't be a proper twin either if I didn't report that he broke first. I'm sorry, it's just what twins do. All right, so I want to share a few things about how to get it back, okay? So here's the first one. First of all, passion can be cultivated. It can be turned on as well as turned off. All right? This is not one from the either you've got it or you don't department. You know what I'm saying? It can be turned on. And I think it is cultivated most readily at the level of the gesture, the moment, you know, the decision, not the 5-year plan, you know, not the extreme makeover, right? And of course, either way though, action is required, and ideally spontaneous action. All right? I think the equation is ready, fire, aim. You know, to practice the fine and fearsome art of spontaneous action on behalf of passions, all right? So, I'll give you an example. I'm sitting around with some friends one evening recently, and one of them says, you know what the problem is? We're not outrageous enough. And so I said, so what would you do, Richard, if you were going to be more outrageous? And he thought about it for a moment, and then he reached up and he swept his hair from middle parted and slicked back to side parted with a cowlick dangling over his forehead. Just like instantly transforming him from Richard to Ricardo. You know, PhD to matinee idol. And he said, and this is the point, he said, I would come into work like this. You know? So the point is to look for the subtlest impulses throughout the day, the subtlest impulses to express yourself, to act on your passions, you know, and be yourself, which granted is an acquired taste, you know, and build from there, you know, to identify little moments of choice throughout any given day that take you either toward or away from your sense of aliveness, all right, your sense of authenticity. So, second one is passion, I think, is ultimately in the risk. Passion is in the risk, in the willingness to step from the sidelines onto the playing field, in any arena again. Step onto the playing field, you know? So, in other words, the act of courage itself, even one bold step beyond the comfort zone will typically kickstart it. Any of you guys ever see a movie called We Bought a Zoo? Does that ring a bell? We Bought a Zoo? This is apparently based on a true story about a family that bought a zoo. And there's a moment in the film version of it where the protagonist, who's played by Matt Damon, says, all you need is 20 seconds of insane courage, and I promise you something great will come of it. It's like that, you know, the willingness to do that. So in other words, the horse and cart equation is not necessarily that you identify your passions first, pardon me, and then begin taking risks on their behalf, but that by taking risks, you begin to clarify what your passions actually are and bring them to life. You know, I did a consultation with a guy 2 years ago who said he was convinced that he needed absolute clarity before he could proceed in operating on some particular passion of his. I need absolute clarity. And I said, you know, I wonder if the clarity you seem intent on finding, you might only find by taking action. You know what I'm saying? And of course it begs the question too, which is the more heroic? Refusing to act without absolute clarity, or being willing to act in the absence of it? You know what I'm saying? It's an interesting question. And of course, risk, utterly relative. Utterly relative. This is not a comparison game. Risk is whatever scares you. It's whatever scares you, you know? And it is not necessarily the big scary stuff like jumping out of airplanes, traveling the world solo. I think maybe more to the point, it's the little stuff that's much closer to home. Every bit is capable of lighting your fires, you know? Taking your jokes or your poems to open mic night, right? being the first to make up after a quarrel. When somebody asks you how you are, tell them how you really are. Say yes to something you've been saying no to. Or say no to something you've been putting up with for too long. Or bundle some novelty into your days. Because I think novelty is a corrective for habit and routine and kind of everyday trances. Novelty. So in other words, and again, start small, all right? Get up on the other side of the bed than the one you always get up on, just for the heck of it. Sit at a different side of the breakfast table than the one you always sit at. Quarter turn to the left or the right. The whole view changes. You know, drive to work a slightly different route than the one you always take. Order something other than your usual at the restaurant. Rearrange one piece of furniture in your house. You know, or maybe the riskiest thing you can do sometimes is spend 1 hour doing your writing, your painting, your photography, your business planning, your fill in the blank. You know, just to give yourself over for 1 hour to something that is a passion for you. All right? You know who Abraham Maslow is? He's the psychologist who gave us, among other things, the hierarchy of needs pyramid. At the bottom, food, clothing, and shelter. Above that, belonging, etc. At the very top, self-actualization. Although his students added transcendence above that at some point. But he's the guy who defined the term self-actualization. He said, self-actualizing types are those who make the growth choice over the fear choice 12 times a day. That's a bar set pretty high. It reminds me of a mentor of mine who I was lamenting my fear of quitting my job to be a freelance writer, okay? And I was just terrified of failing at it, among other things. And he said, Greg, if you're not failing regularly, you are living so far below your potential that you're failing anyway. Which explains why I had lunch with this guy maybe once a year. That is a bar set very high. You know? I mean, there's mentors and then there's tour mentors. But this is a good thing, ultimately. It's a good thing. Because these are people who are not afraid of making fun of the king or the queen. You know, they're perfectly happy to run tire tracks across your nice, neat suburban lawn. You know? Push you out of the nest rather than coddle you. So these are good, ultimately. All right, third, passion is not just exuberance. I mean, it is that, and it's also endurance. It's endurance. Shoulder to the wheel, stamina sometimes, and patience on the order of years. It's one of the missing links, I think, in certainly the discernment process of passions and callings is patience, you know? Malcolm Gladwell, all right, Mr. Tipping Point, he said, and this got a tremendous amount of press at the time, he said, mastery in any field of endeavor requires a minimum of 10,000 hours of dedicated practice. So here's the math on that. 90 minutes a day for 20 years, or some variation of that, right? How many of you guys have ever performed in a play? In a play? Would you mind? Out of 100%, what percentage of your time was spent rehearsing compared to performing? Ballpark. 5 times as much. Okay, so anybody else, does that sound about right? 90, 10, 80, 20, somewhere in there? So I think it is largely passion that accounts for people's willingness to put up with that equation. You know, practice the same lines and the same lyrics for thousands of hours for the chance to take it public, what, a tenth of the time? You know what I'm saying? I mean, that's you know. And unfortunately, here's the thing. In terms of the endurance piece, we often seem to equate passion with an inherently unstable element. You know what I'm saying? It's like you go to the periodic chart and you find passion and it says, prone to degrading quickly when exposed to familiarity or commitment. You know? It's like a booster rocket in the space program. It launches us into outer space, but then once the orbit is reached, it falls away. But I don't really think that's the case. I think real passion has real staying power. I think of one of my heroes, Scheherazade. All right? She's the queen whose stories make up all the Arabian Nights, which were some of my first stories that I ever fell in love with. And it took her 1,001 nights. That's 3 years to turn the Sultan around. You know what I'm saying? I've got a friend who's a couples counselor, and he says, you know what amazes me? People come in here and think they're just going to take a pill, you know, or I'm going to fix their partner. And it's going to be fast, maybe a little painful, but it's going to be like a shot in the arm. It's going to be over quickly. And he says it just is got to be a way to communicate to them that this is not a short-term project. You know, bringing a relationship back from the brink. You know, and it's the same thing here. It took her 3 years to turn the Sultan around. And frankly, you know how the story ends? He becomes impassioned. Her passion for storytelling and for service evoked passion in the Sultan, ultimately. And I've got a friend who told me years ago that he was once arrested at an anti-war sit-in and given a suspended sentence with 15 hours of community service. And the judge said to him, you can do any kind of service you want. So when they let him out, he went right back to the sit-in. He said to me, I was doing community service when they arrested me. Stamina, staying power, you know, a continual return to the work to be done, the soul to keep, if you will. All right? So, last one. I think if we lack passion in our own lives, or for our own lives, I think our other relationships are going to be denied that energy. Our partnerships, our friendships, our children, our colleagues, to say nothing of our communities, corporations, classrooms, congregations, are going to be denied that energy. You know? And it starts, I think, with the one-on-one. You know, in other words, one person following their passion in life, or passions, can have a profound effect on the unfolding of other people's, often without them even knowing about it. And certainly, if you are in any position of leadership or stewardship, maybe especially in relation to children and young adults, you know? But whether you are a parent, a teacher, a mentor, minister, manager, coach, CEO, performer, politician, I think this much is certain. Your passion is critical to their engagement. You know? I once had a woman ask me in a workshop, what advice do you have for parents on helping their kids follow their callings? And I said, yeah, you go first. They look to us for role modeling. They look to us. This is probably also why my father's advice to me when I headed off to college was don't take courses, take professors. Isn't that interesting? Take professors. And of course, the mechanics of inspiration, inspiring by example being what they are, this works not just at the personal level, but the collective, okay? The Gallup Company. This also got a lot of press at the time. They did, in 2012, they did a worldwide poll of 142 countries, all right? And they found that on average, 87% of workers were either not engaged or actively disengaged. Only 13% were engaged. And they calculated that in this country, and I don't know how they go about calculating this stuff, that comes out to $500 billion a year in lost productivity, all right? But not engaged means you're checked out. Okay? Actively disengaged means you are busy acting out your unhappiness and your dispiritedness and spreading the virus around among your colleagues and your kids and your family and your friends and the body politic, of which each one of us, of course, is a single cell. You know, here's how I kind of think of it. This Gallup poll, it's like you're part of a rowing team out on a river. Okay, what it means is that one of those team members is rowing his or her heart out. 5 of them are just taking in the scenery. And 2 of them are actively trying to sink the boat. This is what this actually means, you know? And I think what's interesting, too, is that what's missing from this Gallup poll is a category for actively engaged, i.e. passionate. There was no category for that. What does that mean? There weren't enough people in it to make it statistically significant? I mean, that would be very significant in itself, right? So, I'm going to wind up with this, a beautiful story that I ran across from the Colombian novelist Gabriel Garcia Marquez. He of the 100 Years of Solitude, General in His Labyrinth, etc. So, he tells the story of a man who is trying to solve the world's problems. All right? His little boy comes running into the study and asks if he can help. And the man is impatient to get on with it. He's touched by the boy's gesture, but he's impatient to get on with his work. So he takes a map of the world and he rips it into little tiny pieces and he gives it to the boy. And he says, yeah, here, you can help by piecing the world back together. And of course, the little boy has no conception of what the world looks like, but he takes these pile of shreds off to his room. 2 days later, he comes running back in. He says, Father, I've put the world back together. And in fact, all of the little shreds of paper have been very meticulously taped back together. And the father's stunned. He says, how did you do that? And the boy turns it over and he says, well, on the back was a picture of a person. I put the person back together and then turned it over and the world was back together. So thank you guys so much for coming out and for inviting me. Thank you so much. Thank you.